Like, when was the last time that a rock band had any sort of a cultural moment like, say, Lil Nas X or Taylor Swift have?
What's that say? 4 months ago. I swear this is the last time I'm going to talk about Finn McKenty. I promise you this is not going to become just like a Finn McKenty drama channel. But what turned out to be one of the last videos of his career sort of centered around this question that I find very interesting, which is rock dead? I've seen the subject like kicking around the internet lately, like Gene Simmons said something really dumb, but I don't think I've ever heard a discussion of this subject that I found satisfying, that didn't center, bias or cope or cynicism. So let's try to do that right now. Let's try to give this question the objective and even-handed discussion that it deserves. So let's ask right up front. Is rock dead? Well, what does it mean for a genre of music to be dead? I think the most intuitive place to go with that question is, well, a genre of music is dead if it's no longer mainstream. If it was very popular at one point, but is now no longer popular. If it was mainstream at one point, but is now no longer mainstream. If it was of great cultural influence, but is no longer of great cultural influence, then yes, rock is dead. Obviously. Like, why would anyone even try to deny that rock is dead? While we're on the subject, though, why exactly is rock less popular than it used to be in the 80s and 90s? Well, that's a very complicated question, probably 30 years in the making, but just to keep things simple, in my opinion, there are two factors. Number one, fragmentation. So when you take a genre of music with one big fan base and break it down into many different smaller genres, each with its own self-contained fan base, it doesn't take an MIT scientist to figure out that eventually bottom lines are going to start getting hurt, especially when some of those subgenres start getting so like weird and insular and niche that no casual music listener can be expected to appreciate it. Do other genres have this problem? I don't know. I don't really know other genres well enough to be able to make that determination. But from an outsider's perspective, it sure doesn't seem like it. Like, if there have ever been competing genres of Euro dance pop whose fans have hated each other so much that they get into fistfights when they see each other walking down the street, I sure haven't been made aware of that. And number two, grunge ethics. So we all know the story about how grunge showed up overnight, injected rock music with an egalitarian, anti-corporate, and anti-mainstream ethos, basically killing the dominant genre of rock at the time, which was hair metal, and completely reshape the music industry basically overnight. All that is completely true, but it leaves out one important detail, which is that yes, grunge did completely change music forever. For about 4 years. By 1996, most of the big tentpole grunge bands were broken up or long past their hit-making days, and what was left in their place fucking blew. Then when the Spice Girls dropped, followed by Hanson a couple months later, it was clear that what music fans wanted was exactly the kind of manufactured mainstream pop that grunge was once an alternative to, and rock music was not interested in providing it. Thus providing a vacuum in the music world that other genres were more than happy to fill. I'd actually argue that the most lasting impact grunge had on music was teaching multiple generations of rock fans that it was hopelessly, desperately uncool to aspire to be a traditional rock star or to present yourself with any sort of swagger or sexuality. And to be clear, when that swagger and sexuality involves the flagrant objectification of women, I happen to believe that that trade-off is a good thing. I actually really like being involved in a genre of music that's less commercially viable, but where women can aspire to be fucking ass-kicking Viking-ass warriors and not just eye candy. And also, no, I'm not saying that women are the reason why rock is not mainstream popular anymore. So fucking don't even bother complaining about that fucking shit. That said, this is a discussion about why rock has declined in popularity, and I do genuinely believe that grunge music swooping in, purging rock music of any trait that makes it compatible with what mainstream audiences like, and then dipping out is, at least in part, an explanation. So basically, all this is to say that if the life of a music genre is measured strictly in sales and Billboard chart positions, then yes, rock is obviously dead. It's pretty clear that when the Finn McKentys and the Gene Simmons of the world claim that rock is dead, this is what they mean. Me personally, however, this is not something that I put a whole lot of stock in. Like, I am interested in the music and nothing else. I don't give a crap how many people are listening to it. I don't give a crap how influential it is, if for no other reason than public tastes are fickle and change a lot. For example, country music has gone through at least 3 different boom and bust periods over the past 100 years. Hell, when I was a kid, everyone was telling me that metal was dead for a lot of the same reasons and that I needed to get with the program. When they did, I would just respond by saying, "What was that? I can't hear you over the sound of In Flames' latest masterpiece." So how do I personally characterize what makes a genre dead? Well, to me personally, the through line between all genres of music that can plausibly be described as dead is made up of these 3 traits. Number 1, nobody writes it or performs it anymore. Number 2, nobody listens to it anymore. And number 3, fashion and lifestyle signifiers of the genre are subject to widespread mockery and ridicule.
disco stew doesn't advertise.
It kind of has to be all three of these at once. Like, for example, there's not a whole lot of people writing classical era orchestral music anymore, and it is basically made fun of in popular culture.
Do you know Insane in the Brain?
We mostly know classical.
But a lot of people still listen to it, and therefore it doesn't really make sense to say classical music is dead, right? Compare that to, say, 70s disco, to which all three of these obviously apply. It's pretty non-controversial that that is a genre of music that is completely dead, right?
Disco record sales were up 400% for the year ending 1976. If these trends continue, hey!
So let's ask, are these first two criteria true of rock? Well, recently I was at a sold-out death metal show in downtown Los Angeles because the death metal show that I wanted to go to that night in Hollywood had sold out before I'd gotten a ticket. And while I was there, I heard people talking about at least 3 other sold-out death metal shows that they would have rather been at. So, I don't know, things seem pretty good from where I'm standing. As for number 3, so look, I obviously can't put myself in the headspace of a teenager who did not grow up with rock, right? For all I know, when I walk down the streets looking like this, everyone who sees me is making fun of me behind my back. But I will say, I do see an awful lot of rock shirts everywhere I go. Like, kids, teenagers, young adults, older adults, at the grocery store, at the mall, walking down my neighborhood. I see Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, Misfits, System of a Down, Def Leppard, just everything. And now you might be saying, well, they're just wearing it for the fashion, not because they give a crap about the music. Insert obligatory joke about how kids these days think Nirvana is a clothing brand. Well, first of all, I think that's completely speculative and doesn't give young people enough credit. And second, even if that's true, yeah, that's my entire point. Dressing rock makes you look cool. At absolutely no point after the 70s did it make you look cool to wear a disco uniform or a Casey and the Sunshine Band shirt.
Stu, you haven't worn that thing since 1977.
Hey, disco's coming back.
And plus, you know, it's still all over the culture. Like, Welcome to the Jungle and Thunderstruck are still used as cinematic shorthand for an oh shit's about to go down moment in movies. And I don't know. There's just like a reverence for rock everywhere in our culture. So according to my personal criteria, no, I don't think rock is dead. But I also don't know how universally applicable my personal criteria are. I still think that when people discuss this topic, they mean something that we haven't touched on yet, right? So there's a third criteria that I actually think is very interesting and worth taking seriously. This criteria is that the genre of music is dead if it's creatively incapable of or disinterested in new ideas or new artists and hyper-fixated on nothing but legacy acts. This, to me, is pretty plausible. And it's worth engaging with. It's also the subject of a Finn McKenty video that I think is pretty interesting. What I think the real question is this true of rock? Is rock out of ideas? Now, the notion that in the 2020s, rock is nostalgia-based and backwards-looking is pretty easy to arrive at, right? Like, if you listen to rock radio, it's just an absolute morass of the same 30 songs over and over again. You know, Nirvana, Sublime, Van Halen, maybe like the Interrupters just to mix things up and make it seem like there's something going on. Most of the big rock social media accounts post nothing but like AC/DC versus Queen. Who were the ultimate 70s rockers? Posts over and over again. All of the biggest concert draws are legacy acts like, you know, Metallica, Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, etc. Most of the discourse online and probably in all of our personal lives as well heavily centers legacy acts. So yeah, it feels very intuitively true that rock is backwards looking and nostalgia based. As with most things, below the surface, it gets a little more complicated. This brings us to Finn McKenty's video. So essentially the meat and potatoes of this video are this chart where music is judged on 2 axes: musically good versus musically bad, and artistically innovative versus artistically derivative. Finn McKenty argues that most rock used to occupy the musically good, artistically innovative square.
This space here on the upper right, this is the space that rock used to just completely dominate.
But nowadays it occupies the musically bad, artistically derivative square.
I think rock has really slowly drifted towards the bottom left of this chart over time.
So what does it take for music to get into the top right square? You know, musically good, artistically innovative.
I would also put 9 Inch Nails in this category, who introduced industrial music to the mainstream. It added all these new sounds to the palette of rock, like synths and samples and so forth. This really questioned the fundamental definition of a rock band as being composed of just bass, drums, vocals, and guitar. But if you look at how people talk about technologies like auto-tune or drum samples even now, this is clearly something that is still a pretty challenging idea.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. That makes perfect sense. 9 Inch Nails gets that square because they introduced new instruments and new sonic textures to the overall sound of rock music. So Here's where I would go with that. Power metal. Power metal absolutely deserves a square for introducing the idea that heavy metal music can be like a full-on immersive fantasy storytelling device, complete with narration and Hollywood film orchestration tracks. And if you happen to be around for the power metal is gay discourse that happened in, the late 90s and 2000s, you know that this shit pissed off the gatekeepers as much as any genre in metal history. You'll also know that if you've ever heard Finn McKenty talk about it.
This kind of stuff is for people who are like nerdy yet stupid.
Folk metal. Folk metal deserves to be here for just straight up turning the rock music instrumentation formula on its head. Like, if you thought that Nine Inch Nails were groundbreaking in terms of sonic textures, wait till you hear this.
Devastating lute solo.
Black metal. Black metal deserves this spot for reasons that Finn McKenty has elucidated elsewhere.
It really was like shockingly new and fresh and different. I love people who just like come out of nowhere, do something shockingly new and different that breaks all the rules and pisses off the gatekeepers. And black metal definitely did that. Like, we're gonna deliberately sound like shit as a way to like give the middle finger to all these death metal nerds that want to be super clean and precise.
Modern deathcore. Deathcore deserves this spot for just like combining the heaviest, most brutal sounds on earth with like the most lush, beautiful symphonic arrangements ever put to music. So let's see how Finn McKenty's graph compares with mine. Okay. So why do his chart and my chart look so completely different? So one big reason is that there's just no getting around the fact that Finn McKenty values commercial success a lot more than I do. That is just a fundamental, irreconcilable difference between our core values. Like, even hearing Finn McKenty talk about Nine Inch Nails, he admits that Nine Inch Nails did not invent industrial. They were just the first ones to get mainstream recognition for it.
And yes, obviously, I know that people did this before Nine Inch Nails, but they were clearly the ones who popularized it on a mainstream level.
Which I do not agree is how innovation works. And number two, Finn McKenty just does not like any of the genres that I just talked about. He's called power metal cringe.
I think power metal is just trash.
We all know what he has to say about black metal.
I think it's boring. Boring music, boring forced edginess, boring recycled imagery.
This is just unavoidably an area where Finn McKenty's inability to distinguish between his own opinion and objective fact clouds his ability to objectively assess things. And even outside metal, even in the world of just vanilla rock music, the current generation of rock artists like Youngblood, Dwayne, Kenny Hoopla, the Nova Twins, etc., I honestly do consider to be extremely innovative. These are like artists who bring an authentically, vaguely hip-hop flavored Gen Z sound to rock music, while not only remaining authentically rock, but truly evoking an old school punk sound reminiscent of like The Clash, The Damned, The Ramones, Sham 69, etc. For probably the first time since old school punk was current. So I am obviously a metal guy first and foremost. But honestly, when it comes to mainstream rock, stuff happening today is probably my personal favorite since as far back as when grunge petered out in the mid-90s. But none of this stuff, nor any of the innovation that it brings along with it, is ever going to factor into Finn McKenty's assessment because he personally doesn't like that this is what emo rap evolved into.
The emo rap scene sort of ended up going backwards. Most of these guys stopped making these cool, innovative emo rap songs and started making, in my opinion, kind of generic pop punk that sounds like Blink wannabe bands from 2003. And that pretty much killed my interest in the genre.
Like, I'm sorry, if you just think that this sounds like bland, generic Blink 182 worship and you can't hear anything unique or innovative about it, that seems like a you problem. Like, I feel like that's reflective of nothing but your own inability to listen objectively. So in conclusion, is rock dead? Well, ultimately, my final opinion is that that very question is misguided and doesn't really provide us the information we think it does. But I will say that the people most intent on pushing the rock is dead narrative typically appear to either be informed by a really shallow understanding of what it means for a genre of music to be dead, or by a flat-out refusal to actually engage with what's going on nowadays. So instead, here are the facts on the ground. Number one, rock is a lot less popular than it was in its commercial heyday of the 80s and 90s. Number 2, it's still highly visible all over our culture. Number 3, it's significantly easier to gain any sort of recognition within it if you approach it from a nostalgia exploitation angle and heavily emphasize what audiences are already familiar with. Number 4, there's still tons and tons of innovation and fresh stuff happening if you actively seek it out rather than relying on legacy outlets. Fact is, people have been saying that rock is dead since the 1970s. The only difference is that nowadays, that claim actually seems somewhat more plausible because the nostalgia element is probably a lot more prevalent now than it was in previous generations. The thing is, though, that is something that you and I have some degree of control over. So what can you personally do if you're invested in the future of rock? Very simple. Seek out new artists. If you have Spotify, then you have access to literally every album ever made other than Oppressing the Masses by Violence and the US version of The Clash's debut album. Use that to find new artists. I promise you, new artists are there, and you will find them more satisfying than fucking Senjutsu. Need advice on some artists to start out with? We will get to that next time. In the meantime, though, if you found this interesting or informative in any way, then don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications, and peace out.
Your fish are dead.
Yeah, I know. I can't get them out of there.